Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you having good day. In this video, I am gonna talk about what if Deku inherited his father's quirk and unlocked a new power. Part 1. And subscribe for more, also like this video, that would be super duper awesome, helps me to stay motivated. And thanks to the author of this story, this video is possible. So do check out. And show some love, name of this fanfic is Unexpected Fate by CinnamonVanilla. So do check out the author of this story and check out entire work. Also if you have any complaints about videos, feel free to comment, I will try to improve them. Let's jump in video. Toshinori woke up feeling a strong sense of dread. He didn't know why yet, but he knew something was terribly wrong. He began to think he had a nightmare he just couldn't remember that was putting him on edge, but his old hero instincts told him otherwise. He pulled out his phone to check any messages or calls he missed overnight, but everything seemed calm. Toshinori shook his head thinking he was beginning to lose his mind due to the lack of sleep he had been getting. Insomnia was no stranger to him, so he brushed it off as exhaustion as he got ready for the day. As the day went on, the sense of danger he woke up with never left him. Aizawa silently watched him as he walked in the teacher lounge clearly on edge. Did something happen to the problem child? Aizawa asked. What? No, not that I'm aware of. Why would you think that? Yagi replied. You seem off this morning and usually that means something is going on with Midoriya. Yagi paused for a second thinking about Izuku's whereabouts and soon realized he had yet to hear from him this morning. This is a bizarre occurrence since Izuku usually told him good morning every day via text. Even if it was a simple thing to wake up to, it always made him smile even on his worst mornings. He loved that boy with everything he had even if Izuku didn't know it. One day he would have to stop being such a coward and tell him how he sees him as his son. Now that I think about it, I've had yet to hear from him this morning, maybe I should send him a text. Aizawa rolled his eyes and replied, if something is wrong with him again, tell me so I can make sure recovery girl is on standby. Aizawa then left the room and left Toshinori to his own devices. He then pulled his phone out and sent Izuku a message that he would hopefully get a quick reply to. Good morning my boy, I didn't hear from you this morning, so I'm just checking in to make sure everything is okay. Yagi waited only about 30 seconds before he got a reply. Good morning All Might. Sorry I didn't text you this morning, I kind of got distracted by someone I wasn't expecting to hear from. Yagi knew he shouldn't pry, but his curiosity got the better of him. Someone you weren't expecting to hear from? Yeah, weirdly enough my father just called me last night saying that he was visiting next week. Toshinori paused in surprise. He never heard much about Izuku's father since he was never brought up in conversation before. As soon as he thought about it more, that sense of dread came back full force. He again had to shake the feeling only for several other emotions to take its place. Sadness, knowing this visitation probably meant Izuku wouldn't have much free time with him anymore, irritation from this mystery man suddenly popping up out of nowhere and trying to catch up with a son he doesn't even speak to, and guilt from feeling as selfish as he did. Snapping out of his thoughts, he replied, when was the last time your father visited? I actually don't really remember his last visit. I think I was only about 5 when he was around last. Yagi again felt anger surge through him. He didn't know the full story of why Izuku's father left, but something told him that it wasn't for his family's well-being. Toshinori tried to put on a false sense of excitement for the boy, despite his sudden pulse of anger towards this man he's never met. Well I'm happy you'll finally be able to see him again after all these years. He must be a hard-working man if he's been working overseas as long as he has without visiting you and your mother after all this time. He felt that may have come off a bit more aggressive than he liked, but he hoped Izuku wouldn't notice. I'll be honest, it will be weird seeing him again, but if he really does want to reconnect, I hope I can meet his expectations if he has any. Nonsense my boy, any man would be proud to call you their son. You've come so far from who you were when we first met. You should have nothing to worry about. Yagi meant every word as he typed them out. He would never be disappointed in his boy no matter what happened. Izuku was his light and whole reason why he chose to live on. His strong determination, positivity, loving personality, and sometimes dangerous levels of selflessness made him a perfect candidate for the future #1 hero. If this mystery man chose not to see that, then he doesn't deserve Izuku as his son. His phone notified yet again as Izuku replied, thanks All Might, I really hope you're right. I will see you later for our training session if you're still wanting to do it. Of course my boy, I will see you later today. As Yagi put his phone away he was still a bit annoyed over this whole situation. Something in the back of his mind was telling him to not trust Midoriya's father, even if he had yet to show himself. That sense of dread was steadily getting worse the more he thought about him, so he shook his head and prepared himself for his class. Everything will be fine. Izuku was full of anxiety to say the least. His father, who he barely even thinks about, let alone talks to, has come into town to visit for a few weeks and he's struggling to even interact with him. He's still not very happy about this whole situation, but he knows he can't voice his thoughts out loud without his mother and father getting upset. Since it was the first day of summer break, he was away from his dorm room at UA. It was nice being home and seeing his mom every day again, even if it was only through summer break. He missed her company sometimes while he was living at the dorms, so he was glad he was able to keep her company and tell her about what's been happening at UA. It would feel even more normal if his father Hisashi wasn't here too. He knew he shouldn't be seeing his father as an inconvenience like he did, but he couldn't help but feel this visit is forced. His father also seemed a bit off for some reason, but knowing he hasn't seen him since he was 5, he couldn't exactly judge him just yet. Hisashi is probably doing the same thing he is, which is testing the waters between them before truly interacting. As he was lost in thought, he heard a light knock on the door as it opened slowly to his father greeting him. "Hey son, I thought you were asleep with how quiet you are in here. Your mother has dinner ready if you're hungry." "Oh, of course, I'll be out in a second, Dad. Thanks," Izuku replied. Hisashi nodded and closed his door again, leaving him alone once more. He felt like he had to talk to him as if he was reading off a teleprompter. It didn't help that he felt like he was walking on eggshells around him for some reason too. But mostly, he hated the feeling of calling his own father Dad. He didn't think that this man had the right to be called it yet, since he barely knows him. He still has a pang of guilt when saying that, but he couldn't help but see an image of All Might when he said the word Dad, and Hisashi wasn't him. He would be mortified if All Might ever knew these feelings he had, but he couldn't help it. All Might has been there for him for as long as he could remember, even if it was only through a screen. He was the whole reason he wanted to become a hero and still strongly feels that way even now. He loves All Might far more than his biological dad, no matter how guilty he feels about thinking that. As he leaves his room, he hears his mom talking to Hisashi about how well he's doing in school and about his delayed quirk development. As he walks to the table, Izuku can't get a word out before Hisashi starts asking questions. "So I heard you have a quirk now, son. I never in a million years believed you would ever develop quirk. How does it work and what type of quirk is it? Did you get my quirk or your mother's, or is it a mix of both? That would be amazing to see in action." As he gets bombarded with questions, his mother interrupts and tells Hisashi to give his a second to answer. He silently thanks her while saying, "It's a strength quirk, it amplifies my physical strength to where I can take down even the strongest villains if I have to." "That's amazing, son," Hisashi said with an almost false excitement. "You have to show it to me before I leave again." Izuku internally cringed again after Hisashi called him son. It doesn't feel right coming from him and almost disingenuous. It's like he's putting up a temporary facade to make them feel a false sense of security. The more he talked to him, the more uncomfortable he became. "Of course, I can show you when I get the chance." Izuku then turned towards Inko. "Hey mom, I meant to ask, can I go see All Might in the morning? I told him I would train with him for a while on the beach." His father looked taken aback when he asked that question, which confused him for a second. He then realized he forgot to tell him All Might was his mentor. Before Hisashi could question him, Inko said, "Of course honey, as long as you're back before noon. Your father and I want to spend some time with all of us together while he's here. I promise I'll be back before then. He just wanted to train for a couple of hours so I can come back home for that same reason." Hisashi then cut in, "You know All Might. I knew he was a teacher at UA, but I never knew you saw him outside of school." Oh yeah, he mentors me since our quirks are so similar, but sometimes we will train at the local beach to keep up on my quirk practice," Izuku replied. Hisashi then had a flash of an unreadable expression come across his face. To Izuku it looked almost like disgust or anger, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Hisashi then replied, "You must love that, judging by how much you practically worship the guy." Izuku felt his anger begin to rise because of how his father said that. He felt like this stranger was not only insulting his interests, but who he saw as his real dad. "You're right, I do love training with him, he has helped me in more ways than one." Izuku then finished his dinner and excused himself from the table without really involving himself in any more conversation. He went into his room, grabbed his barbells, and started doing arm reps. He was annoyed to say the least, but he would not show it in front of his father due to worry over causing problems. After he was done getting out some of his anger on his barbells, he picked up his phone and texted All Might. "Are we still training tomorrow morning at the beach?" He waited a minute before his phone got a notification. "Of course my boy, did you think I would leave you all alone without telling you?" Yagi replied. No, of course not, sorry if it came across that way. I just wanted to make sure your injury wasn't bothering you or anything. You're too easy to tease and you don't need to worry about me so much, your job is to concentrate on your own progress. Although I am curious, how is your visit with your father going?" Izuku paused at that, wanting to tell the truth about how annoyed he is with his father's presence, but he didn't want All Might to worry. So he replied, "It's going great, we are just catching up over what's been happening over the years and about my quirk." Izuku waited for a reply, but after a few minutes of nothing back, he assumed All Might fell asleep since it was getting late. Although, after about 20 minutes, All Might replied, "That's great my boy, I told you had nothing to worry about." Izuku wanted to reply to keep conversation going since he loved talking to All Might, but he suddenly felt saddened. He knew why, but he felt ashamed of feeling how he did. What he wanted was for All Might to feel the same way about his father's visit as he did. He wanted him to get angry and annoyed about his seemingly fake interest in him and his passive-aggressive comments about All Might himself. He wanted to stop hearing Hisashi call him son and have All Might do it instead. He hated feeling like he couldn't speak without having to worry about his real thoughts and feelings pour out, which would undoubtedly cause issues. He put his phone down, crawled under his covers, and fell asleep in a way that was all too common for him, with a heavy heart and tears soaking his pillow. When morning came, Izuku shot out of bed and started on his way towards the beach he grew to love. The beach not only signified his new life towards heroism, but the bond him and All Might have. The training he went through was hell to say the least, but just being there with his childhood hero was more than enough to outweigh the hardships. When he approached, he saw All Might staring at the water seemingly in deep thought. Izuku called out and ran towards him doing his usual greeting. "Good morning my boy, I hope you slept well because I have a hard session for you today," Yagi said as he ruffled Izuku's hair. "I'm prepared for it today," Izuku said, smiling at the display of affection. "I don't have too much time, but I promise I'll get as much in as possible." Toshinori smiled a bit sadly and started to give Izuku instructions on what to do. As the session went on, Yagi watched on fondly and full of pride as Izuku pulled off all his exercises off without struggle. His impressive display of speed, strength, and perfect fighting style made Toshinori think yet again how he chose the right successor. As he finished, Yagi gave Izuku a cold water bottle to cool off as he sat them down to allow Izuku to catch his breath. "How are you feeling my boy?" When he asked that question he meant it more than just in a physical sense because he noticed Izuku was acting more quiet than normal. "I feel fine All Might, it wasn't too hard this time around." "I could see that, you did amazing today, but that does mean I have to go a bit harder on you next time," Yagi said as he ruffled Izuku's hair once more. He wished he could show more affection than that, but he didn't want to overstep boundaries and freak the boy out. He would be devastated if Izuku rejected him if he told him about his true emotions. "Hey All Might, could I tell you something?" Yagi paused by how nervous the boy was, but still replied, "Of course my boy, what wrong?" "If I told you I didn't really like my father being at home, would you see me as selfish and mean?" Toshinori was surprised at first after that sudden admittance, but then his shock soon turned into a sort of giddiness which he again felt guilt about. "You are many things young Midoriya, but selfish is not one of them. It is only natural for you to feel uneasy about a man you barely know coming into your home after years of being gone." He wanted to be reassuring as possible without having his jealousy coming into his tone. Because yes, he was definitely jealous over the fact that this man, who he barely considered a father, was coming in and calling Izuku son when he felt he had more right than any one other man to do exactly that. After Izuku admitting he's not too fond of his real father, it gave him a slight hope that Izuku had similar feelings to his. Izuku then broke his thought stating, "I know I shouldn't be feeling like this and should try to bond with him, but I just can't. He seems so distant with me and always seems to speak to me like I'm offending him by just existing. I always felt he left because he never wanted me, especially after he figured out I was quirkless. I would never tell mom, but the night he left I heard them arguing over me and how he didn't want a quirkless child. He said he never wanted a child in the first place, but stayed because he still loved mom. I know all of his interest in me is fake, which is why I can't stand being around him." Toshinori listened as he ranted with his own anger rising at the thought of this man, saying he never wanted Izuku. He couldn't comprehend the thought of someone rejecting an amazing child like Izuku. If this man didn't want Izuku, then he would gladly claim him as his own son. "Can I tell you something that makes me feel selfish too?" Izuku stopped and looked at All Might with confusion in his eyes, since he can't think of All Might of being selfish either, but he nodded his head anyway. Toshinori took a deep breath, "Here goes nothing," he thought. "If I told you I disliked your father just as much if not more than you do, would you believe me to be selfish as well?" Izuku looked wide-eyed at him, but curiosity got the better of him as he asked why. All Might looked at the water once more, being too afraid to look Izuku in the eye when he said this. "It still seems he's the same coward when it comes to the possibility of losing Izuku. I think that your father is cruel to come back into your life, especially if he said he never wanted you. You have every right to be angry with him, but my anger towards him is different. I hate the fact that he can freely call you son when he hasn't earned the title of your father. I have seen you as my own child for a long while now, and with your father in town, it's torturous to think he's doing things with you that I have been wanting to do for ages. I understand if you feel repulsed by Yagi couldn't finish his sentence from Izuku colliding into his chest. He instinctively wrapped his arms around him as Izuku replied in a shaky voice, "Do you really mean that?" Yagi, with every bit of sincerity he felt, said, "Of course my boy, I don't think you realize how much I care for you. If I never met you, I most likely would be dead by now, but you gave me a new reason to live. You are my joy in every sense of the word, my main purpose is to keep you happy and safe." Your father yet again. Yagi was cut off by a very determined Izuku stating, "Hisashi isn't my dad." "You are." Toshinori, with own tears of relief and joy in his eyes, wrapped as much of his body around his boy as they both sat and allowed their confessions to sink in. All Might was in bliss after he finally got out what he's been feeling for over a year now. Knowing Izuku saw him as his dad was a level of joy he never thought possible. He did hope to stay with his son a bit longer, but his real father called him home before they could talk more. He hopes this next week goes quickly so Hisashi leaves and hopefully never comes back. When night came around, he texted Izuku asking if he was alright. He knew his son was not happy about hanging around that man and probably wanted to vent after it all. Izuku was quick to text back but told Yagi to call me. Toshinori was quick to call, fearing the worst since Izuku never prompts phone calls. Izuku was quiet when he spoke, like he was afraid of being heard. "Hi Dad," Izuku said. Yagi felt more waves of pure joy roll over him over that title before he asked about what happened. "Not a lot happened actually, and he was more invested with Mom than me, but I was fine with that." "Good, maybe the rest of his stay will go just as smoothly and he'll leave you be," Yagi said. "I hope so too, but I still can't help notice he seems a bit off." Yagi feels that dread feeling returning as his son says this. "What do you mean he seems off?" "Well, it's hard to explain, but he seems almost robotic, like he practiced what he is going to say before we went out. It could be me just disliking him, but I just feel like me and Mom shouldn't be around him." Yagi was beginning to feel more dread and fear as Izuku continued, but shook it off as being slightly overprotective and paranoid. "Just try to stay clear of him then. If you feel like you're in danger, get out of there as fast as you can." Again, he felt as if he was overreacting, but other part of him said to take his child seriously. "I will Dad, I promise, I just hope he leaves Mom alone. He hasn't done anything bad yet, but I know things can change quickly. I also meant to say, Hisashi said he wants all three of us to go camping the last 3 days before he leaves. Mom told him I've never been camping before and he saw it as a sort of bonding opportunity he can have with me. I really don't want to go, but I know Mom would be mad if I said no." Toshinori's anger rises again at the thought of Izuku getting forced into something he doesn't want to do. Especially by that man who thinks he can take his son wherever he pleased. "Do you need me to step in and tell him you can't for training reasons?" "No, it's okay, the reason I'm going is to make sure Mom is safe and to ensure he doesn't do anything weird," Izuku said. As much as Toshinori hated it, he agreed with that reason. He knew how much Izuku worried about his mother's safety and he wouldn't trust that man alone with her either. "Okay, just please try to be safe, you have a tendency to attract danger like a magnet." "Oh I know, Mr. Izawa always reminds me of that fact, but that trip won't be for another week." Toshinori suddenly felt a strange surge of boldness as he asked the next question. "Is your mom and Hisashi asleep?" There was a pause on the other end with shuffling noises as Izuku checked to make sure. "Yeah, their door is closed and it's quiet, which means they're asleep," he whispered. Yagi then proceeded to ask, "If you're still awake enough to do it, can you meet me at the beach for a walk?" Without hesitation, Izuku said he would be there in 10 minutes. Izuku was true to his word and came running up to him on the beach 10 minutes later. At first glance, his son seemed awake enough but was definitely tired. It made sense since it was nearing 11 at night and he's usually asleep by now. "Hi Dad. Why are you out walking this late at night, aren't you tired?" "I could ask the same question my boy. Your eyes are awfully droopy and you seem slow," Yagi teased. Izuku just giggled and brushed off Toshinori's hand that made way into his hair again. "I'm not that tired, besides I always like late night walks." As they walked down the beach and had comforting conversations, both grew too tired to ignore their desire for sleep. "I think it's time we both go home for the night," Yagi said as he yawned. "Yeah, I think that's a good idea," Izuku returned as he also yawned. As they got up to the sidewalk, Toshinori was about to say his goodbyes for the night, but Izuku decided it was his turn to deepen their relationship this time. "Hey Dad, do you think I could go home with you this time?" Yagi, with the same eagerness as Izuku's agreement to this walk, said, "I never thought you'd ask, son," as he grinned ear to ear. As Izuku and Toshinori approached his apartment, Izuku began to realize he didn't exactly come prepared for spending the night here. He only had his street clothes on him and needed some toiletries to clean up for the night. Yagi seemed to read his mind and told him, "I have extra supplies you can use for the night." Izuku thanked him as they approached Yagi's apartment and entered into a relatively basic room. There wasn't much personalization as far as Izuku could tell, which sort of saddened him. He felt his dad should have more comforting items like soft blankets or pillows on the couch, or even some pictures on the wall that shows his apartment was at least lived in. His observations were disturbed by Toshinori giving him some old clothes of his he didn't even know was missing. He looked up at All Might in surprise as he said, "Aizawa gave me those just in case the situation came up. Strangely enough, he believed you would sleep here at some point. Guess I should thank him." Toshinori walked away with a smirk while Izuku stood there with a slight blush on his face. Once Izuku was changed and prepared for bed, he started towards Yagi's couch with a blanket and pillow, only to be blindsided by Yagi picking him up like a child. Giving a startled squeak of surprise, Yagi then brought him to his own bed and put him under the covers. "Wait, All Might, I don't need your bed really. I don't want you to sleep on the couch in your own house." Yagi just chuckled, "I never said I was sleeping on the couch, just like you aren't either." Izuku didn't have time to be surprised when Toshinori slid under the covers right next to him. He then turned off the light on his nightstand, leaving only his nightlight to illuminate the room. Izuku was about to ask why he would want to share the bed, but before he could, Yagi pulled Izuku into him, tucking him under his chin with his arms wrapped around his torso. Izuku went deathly still and quiet at first, but as soon as his brain caught up with what was happening, tears soon started to make way down his face. Before their confessions, he never would have thought All Might would see him as his son. Now in his current position, he realized how badly he had wanted this type of relationship with him. His insecurities usually always got in the way when asking for more physical affection, but now that he knows what he's been missing, he wanted more. Izuku curled himself further into Yagi while he silently cried. Then Toshinori continued to wrap his whole body around his son, like he was trying to protect him from the outside world. He brushed his hand through Izuku's hair as he shushed him and coaxed him to sleep. Yagi didn't know how he survived before his time meeting Izuku. He honestly didn't know what true love and joy was up until now. He could care less about that man right now and his interference in him and his son's life. He knew that Hisashi was no threat to their relationship now and was glad to finally call himself Izuku's dad. The next morning Izuku woke up, he felt more rested than he felt in a very long time. He wasn't getting the best sleep since Hisashi came to town, but now he knew the antidote to that problem. His dad wasn't awake yet, so he closed his eyes to go back to sleep but was startled by his phone ringing. Yagi woke up with a sound too, which caused him to unravel his hold on Izuku. "Sorry, I forgot to put my phone on silent, Hisashi is calling, I'll be right back." When Izuku left the room, Yagi could help but feel that strange sense of dread again after hearing it was that man calling his son again. He knew he was being ridiculous, but it was a feeling he couldn't get rid of. Izuku came back into the room with a worried expression on his face. "I guess Mom and him weren't too happy about me leaving in the middle of the night. They want me back home as soon as possible." Yagi deflated at this because he didn't want to part from Izuku so soon, but he supposed he should have thought over this sudden sleepover more carefully. "I understand, my boy, you can head home and I'll meet up with you later." Izuku said a goodbye and gave him a quick hug as he left promptly out the front door. Immediately after, Yagi felt emptiness consume him. He never realized how lonely he felt before he met Izuku, but now he was starting to feel a bit clingy with his old age. He never knew family other than Nana, but that was too far in the past to really remember correctly, and this was a different type of relationship in comparison. This damn week was going far too slow for his liking, and this supposed camping trip was going to be hell. The next week came and went without any major events. Izuku was still irritated with his father's presence and was even more frustrated that he had to go on this stupid camping trip. The only thing he was happy about was that this trip signified the last days Hisashi would be in Japan. As Inko and Hisashi loaded up the car, Inko called for Izuku asking if he was ready. Before he confirmed to his mom that he was, he gave a quick text to All Might saying he would back in 3 days' time. Yagi quickly texted back saying he would miss him and would have other plans ready for them to help get over Hisashi's annoying trip. Izuku sent a quick thanks, "I'm looking forward to those plans." "I'll miss you too." Once all of them were loaded in the car, they took off to the camping grounds a few hours away. All Might was having a hard time with all of this camping trip business. His dread feeling was at an all-time high being away from Izuku, so he was trying to distract himself with work for the meanwhile. As he was typing away future class plans for next semester, Aizawa quietly entered the room. Toshinori didn't even realize he entered the room until Aizawa spoke up. "So what happened to the problem child?" Toshinori spun around and quickly followed with, "Why do you always seem to ask me that question as soon as you see me?" Aizawa looked at him. "Because you always drown yourself in work when you're worried over Midoriya," he stated matter-of-factly. Young Midoriya is currently on a camping trip with his parents, Yagi stated in annoyance. Aizawa looked at him with a slightly confused face. I thought Midoriya's father wasn't in the picture. He wasn't before these previous few weeks, but he apparently came back to visit for a bit. Aizawa narrowed his eyes, judging by how unsettled you are, I'm guessing you don't like the man. Yagi grew more agitated as he continued, that man randomly came back even after Izuku told me he overheard him say he never wanted a child. Aizawa narrowed his eyes a bit more and questioned further, have you met him? Yagi shook his head, no, and I rather not either. Izuku has told me more than enough for me know I dislike him. Aizawa rolled his eyes, you don't like him because you think he will steal Izuku from you? Toshinori spun around from his computer again with anger flaring in his eyes, he won't steal him from me, that I can guarantee you. Once this stupid trip is over, he will leave and everything will go back normal. Besides, how did you know that was what I was thinking about? Aizawa rolled his eyes once more, you are far too obvious with your extreme favoritism towards Midoriya. I know you see him as more than just a student just as much as he sees you more than a teacher. It's pathetic really. Toshinori raised his eyebrow, you also seem quite attached to young Midoriya too, Aizawa, going off of how closely you watch him in training and other dangerous activities we do. It's obvious. And quite pathetic really, he said smirking. He then heard Aizawa make a quiet tch sound, like I said before, he's a problem child, if I don't keep a closer eye on him, he'll get himself injured in some weird way again. I'm not going to be responsible for him breaking another bone or bleeding out from some freak accident. Whatever you say, Aizawa, just know he looks up to you almost just as much as he does me. Aizawa then left the room, shutting the door behind him with slight irritation. He then turned into his office, went to his computer, and started to look up the name Hisashi Midoriya. He wasn't worried, he just knew the problem child would somehow get himself into trouble if he didn't intervene in some way. When the Midoriyas arrived at the camping grounds, they were greeted with a thick forest and a large stream that lead to a beautiful lake at the bottom of the mountain. Izuku actually liked the view and thought this trip wouldn't be as bad as long as he strayed as far from Hisashi as possible. His mother and Hisashi were unloading the car when they called him over to help set up their tents. Quite the view, right? I thought it would better if we kept a bit away from the rest of the camping grounds for the peace and quiet, Hisashi stated. It's great honey, we can go hiking in the morning if you like, Izuku. I know you've never been camping before, which is mainly my fault, Inko said guiltily. Izuku quickly reassured her, saying he didn't blame her for anything he hasn't yet experienced. We just never had the time is all he told her with a smile. Inko returned it and began to help setting up camp while Izuku stayed away as far from Hisashi as possible. As night came around, Hisashi seemed more off than usual. He was more fidgety and looked as he was preparing himself for something unknown. Izuku was slightly alarmed at this change, but just thought it his annoyance from just being near him too much. He then went over to the creek to put his feet into as he looked at his phone. He knew the signal out there was horrible, but that still didn't stop him from trying to text All Might. Hi Dad, I don't know if you'll get this, but we've made it to the camp and I'm just as bored as I thought I would be. Mom is having a good time though with all of us being together, but I just can't share the same enthusiasm. Hope everything is well at home. He soon gave up on getting a response after a while and went towards his tent to prepare for a night's sleep. He didn't know why, but after he ate he became more tired than normal. He blamed it on the traveling, going off how tired his mother was too. As soon as he laid down he was out like a light. Izuku woke up extremely groggy, as if he was waking up from being on painkillers. This was extremely startling since he'd taken nothing before he went to bed, and as he tried to move, his body felt like lead. He looked around the best he could and found himself alone in his tent. Until Hisashi opened it. Izuku felt an immediate sense of fear seeing Hisashi covered in blood. He tried to move again, but his body felt as if there was an elephant sitting on him. Awake are we? Hisashi said in an emotionless tone. I was hoping you would stay asleep with all those roofies in your system, but I guess you're more immune to them than your mother was. Izuku grew even more desperate as he asked where he is in a slurred voice. No longer with us, Hisashi replied in that same robotic voice that set his uneasiness on the high. Tears immediately sprung to his eyes as he could tell Hisashi wasn't lying. I know, it's a shame really, she was a great woman. If only she only listened to me and killed you before you were able to grow inside her. Now I have to care of the problem myself. Izuku tried to activate his quirk, only for nothing to happen. Hisashi noticed his struggles and chuckled coldly. Yeah, that's the thing about roofies, not only do they practically paralyze the body, but they double as great quirk suppressants too. Izuku knew in his heart that this was the end as soon as he felt the sharp knife against his neck. Hisashi was tauntingly apologizing to him, saying it's nothing personal, even though that this was exactly that. When Hisashi dug the knife harshly across his neck, he felt extreme pain and all his blood start draining from jugular vein. He couldn't speak as Hisashi left his tent and he felt himself fading fast. He started to cry over what he was about to lose and what he already lost. His mom had to suffer the same fate that he couldn't protect her from. He was no hero if he couldn't even save his own mother, and now he had no chance to be one. His thoughts went to his friends and All Might and how he wished desperately to deepen their bond like they planned. This was unfair. This should have never happened. Why didn't he just listen to his stupid gut and got rid of Hisashi when he had the chance? As he started to take his last breath, he was only able to mouth one word. Dad. Yagi woke frantically from his sleep covered in sweat with that same sense of dread at an all-time high. He started to cough up blood to the point he felt like his lung might come with it. He didn't know why, but he needed to get a hold of Izuku now. This dread only came when it involved his son. Call it paternal instincts or just his extreme paranoia, but something happened, he knows it. He picked up his phone and called his son's number only for it to go to voicemail without even ringing. This set him into a further spiral, causing him to call the only other number he knew that could help. It rang a few times before he heard a groggy hello on the other side. "Hello Namasa, I need your help. Now." Yagi was pacing his room when Namasa knocked at his door. "What's going on Tashi, you said it was an emergency." Yagi quickly nodded. "It's Izuku, he's missing." Namasa grew serious and started asking his usual questions that were customary for missing person cases. "How long has he been missing and where did you last see him?" Tashinori then explained to him the last few weeks, including Hisashi, Izuku concerns about him, their camping trip, and even their newly established relationship. Namasa sighed as he listened to everything he was told. "Tashi, did Izuku's biological father harm him or his mother in any way before?" Tashinori looked at him. "No, not yet, but that doesn't mean he's incapable of doing so." "You're right Tashi, everyone has the capability of harming another, but what makes you think his father harmed him?" "I told you, Izuku has been saying he's been acting off the entire time he's been here and I'm not going to dismiss that." Namasa noted how disheveled and scared Tashi looked and seen his bad feelings be correct before. "Alright Tashi, if you believe something happened to Izuku, then I will look into it, but I need to first know what camping grounds he's at." Tashinori gave Namasa the location that Izuku sent him specifically if a situation like this were to arise. Namasa looked at the location which he soon recognized from past cases. It made him nervous because he knew those who went missing here usually were never found, but he would never tell Tashi that. He hoped for both Izuku and Tashi's sake that all of this was just a big misunderstanding. The news of the Midoriya's disappearances quickly made its way to UA. All of Class A were trying to discussing a way to find Izuku and his family as quickly as possible. Bakugo was fuming over the nerd's lame way of getting attention because this was exactly that. Some stupid act to make everyone worry about him for no reason. He was so not worried, he knew stupid Deku could handle himself, especially against that deadbeat shithead that was trying to reconnect with him. Even if he somehow gotten hurt, he would just bounce back again after resting in his favorite hospital bed he's practically married to. Even knowing this, he was going to end the damn nerd himself for making everyone obsess over him again. Uraraka was far more scared about this whole disappearance thing than Bakugo was. The rest of the class was also wanting to go out to those campgrounds and start looking, but they all knew Mr. Ozawa would never allow it. Next week, the new semester starts and she knew Izuku would be upset if he missed the first day. She slightly prayed that this was just Izuku forgetting to charge his phone or just being out of range of a good signal. Once he got back, she'll scold him for making them all worry. Ozawa was talking to Hisashi about which section of the woods they would begin their search in. Namasa allowed them to help with the search since they were more aware of Izuku's habits and what he would do if something did go wrong. They wanted to look at the area where Izuku's phone last pinged, but Namasa warned them about what they could possibly find and to prepare for the worst. Ozawa and Mick wanted to believe that this was just them overreacting and the Midoriyas were just off the grid for a bit, but their guts were still twisting even with their hopes high. "Hey Eraser, do you think Midoriya could be before he could confess his worries?" Shouta quickly rejected. "No, he's alive and well, I know it. The problem child may get himself into dangerous situations more often than not, but he always survives. We will find him alive and we will bring him home." Mick nodded in uncertainty with Ozawa's claims because he truly wanted to believe them, but something in his heart told him this would not end happy. Night fell once again upon the camping grounds and no one had any luck finding the Midoriyas. Namasa was beginning to think this was becoming more than just a missing persons case. "Sir, the cadaver dogs you called for arrived," said the officer to Namasa. "Good, we are gonna need them. This area is becoming too large for us to search without help." The 3 dogs that were available at this hour were given Izuku's scent from one of his well-worn shirts. The dogs first started sniffing in circles until they all shot off in one direction. The officers followed after them until they heard howling, indicating the dogs found their target. When Namasa got to the spot the dogs were at, the dogs started digging at a spot in the dirt. The dirt clearly looked like it was dug up just recently, which made his stomach drop. Once the dogs were called off, Namasa started digging into the dirt himself and stopped once he felt a piece of cloth. Namasa felt like he was going to be sick as he looked at the all-M shirt covered in dried blood. Oh god. Izawa and his Ashi heard a call over their radio saying the dogs found something that they should see. When they arrived, everyone was talking quietly with all of their flashlights pointed towards a hole in the ground. Izawa and Mick paled and knew if they went near that hole, they would have to face the reality they both wanted to deny. What did they find? Izawa asked in a shaky voice as if he didn't already know. The only thing Namasa did was look at them with apologetic eyes. I'm so sorry. Shouda felt everything go into slow motion as he zoned in on the shallow grave that contained his problem child. He heard Mick choke off a sob and quickly walk away to prevent looking at the side of the murdered child. Because that is what he was, a child. A child that never made it past his 16th birthday. Izawa blinked away the burning behind his eyes and allowed his grief slowly turn into pure rage. Who did it? He said with deadly voice. We don't know yet, but we're assuming it was the father. We found the mother buried through those trees over there without any sign of the father. Most likely he took off once he killed them since the car they came in is gone, along with all of his things. I know you're furious eraser, but we have to think logically here. If you let your anger go out of control, you'll end up doing something stupid. Izawa didn't want to hear a lecture he didn't care about, so he walked away towards a spot he should have never had come to. He looked down into the hole that kept his student, which caused his grief to hit him full force once more. God kid, I'm so sorry, I should have known better than to let you leave UA with that monster. Just know I will always be proud to call you my student. He allowed more grief and guilt wash over him before he walked off to find his Ashi. Do you think they'll find him tonight? Uraraka asked Tsuyu, who was looking equally worried. I'm sure they'll find him soon, he's probably just in the part of the woods they haven't looked at yet, ribbed. They both were still unsure about this whole situation and wanted it all to end as quickly as possible. The whole class was on edge and keeping close to their phones just in case Izuku decided to call them when he got signal back. Because that's why this was happening. Just a loss of phone signal. After about another hour of waiting, Izawa and present Mick walked through the door looking ragged. Did you find them? Uraraka quickly asked. Izawa and his Ashi looked defeated as they nodded. We found him with his throat cut by the lake, buried in a shallow grave alongside his mother, Izawa said in a detached tone. He knew he was being cold with how he broke the news to his class, but he couldn't allow himself to feel right now because he knew tears would follow. The whole room went quiet for what felt like a year. He's dead, Uraraka said shakily with tears already streaming down her cheeks. There's no way, he can't be gone. You're lying, Kirishima said in denial. He would never allow himself to die, he's too good of a fighter, followed Denki. Tenya for once was speechless and in shock over this sudden loss. He considered Izuku like a brother that he would grow alongside with and watch them both become heroes. He couldn't be gone, there was no way in hell he could believe that. More of the class started denying Izawa's claims in an uproar, calling him a liar until Katsuki spoke up. That bastard. Dottie said looking at the ground. That bastard father of his did it, didn't he? Everyone went silent looking at him in shock. That's what the investigators are thinking, he was the only one not found and his car was gone, Hasashi decided to explain. He's gonna die, Bakugo threatened as he stormed towards his dorm room. Namasa knew who he had to tell next about this tragedy, but he was dreading it with every fiber of his being. He knew Tashi had grown extremely attached to the boy, so much so he considered him as his own child. He has sadly told many parents about their child's deaths before and it never got easier. Having to tell one of his close friends this news was going to be hard to say the least. As he looked at his phone, he saw the many missed calls and messages from Tashi asking if they found anything yet. He sighed as he called him back and it barely took one ring before Yagi picked up. Did you find him? He asked with urgency. Namasa contemplated telling him over the phone, but he felt that this type of news should be told face to face, even if he dreaded the thought. Where are you right now? He asked, completely avoiding Yagi's question. I'm at home. Why? Okay, stay there then, I'm on my way over. I'll tell you about everything we found once I get there. Namasa hung up the phone before Tashi could respond as he got into his police car. As he prepared to drive off, he tried to contemplate how on earth he was going to tell one of his best friends that his kid was dead. As he arrived at Tashi's apartment, he sat in his car mentally readying himself for the heartbreak that was about to see. Before he even got to the door, Yagi swung it open. Where is he? The detective saw how exhausted and worried he looked and assumed he most likely hasn't slept since this all began. Could you sit down first, you look like you're about to collapse and you just might after this, he thought sadly. I'm fine, just tell me what's going on, Yagi said with more urgency. Namasa took a deep breath and began to explain everything they found. Yagi was listening intently with suspicion in his eyes, wondering why he was going into all this unnecessary detail. We were actually about to give up the search until we found. Namasa, please just tell me where my son is, Yagi said in a desperate and pleading voice, disrupting Namasa's poor attempt at stalling. The detective looked at him with a deep sadness as he finally explained what he's been afraid to admit. We found Izuku and his mother by the lake that resides in the camping grounds. Tashi, we found them. Don't. Yagi said, yet again interrupting him. You're lying, I know you are. This is all just some sick joke, isn't it? You think I would fall for something like th? It's no joke, Tashi, Namasa said, cutting off Yagi this time. You know I would never joke about something like this. I know how close you were to the boy, but… No, you don't. That boy was… Toshinori couldn't finish the sentence before his voice was cut off by a sob. Yagi had to take a few shaky breaths before he continued. That boy is why I decided to leave, and if he's not here, there is nothing here stopping me from following right after him. Namasa grew worried over that claim, especially when his quirk told him he wasn't lying, so he decided to distract Tashi from his dark thoughts by giving him another piece of information. It was the father, Tashi. Yagi spun around with rage and grief covering his face. You think I don't already know that? Izuku told me that bastard was acting weird since the day he decided to show his face. I knew I should have never let him go out there. My whole damn soul was telling me something was wrong, and my dumb self ignored it and brushed it off as just being jealous. I promise you that prick is going to pay for this once I get a hold of him. I won't rest until he's dead. Yagi stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him before Namasa could get another word in. The detective sighed in defeat when he heard gut-wrenching sobs coming from the other side of the door. He knew this was going to shatter Tashi no matter how he broke the news, but he also knew that he was going to be inconsolable for quite a while. He knew he couldn't relate since he doesn't know what it's like losing a child, but he knew grief all too well. He left a note on the coffee table telling Tashi to contact him when he was ready before he left the apartment. He hoped Tashi didn't do anything rash in the meanwhile. Yagi felt like he was dying. His whole body was screaming at him, and his heart felt like it was turning to dust every breath he took. He thought he knew pain from losing Nana and fighting all for one, but this was hell. The deep unbinding grief and guilt he felt was beyond description. The only thing he wanted to was scream at the universe for taking everything he loved away from him and kill the monster that murdered his son. No parent should ever have to live through the death of their child. He knew they only just began that stage in their relationship, which only made him cry harder. He wanted to watch him grow up, become the #1 hero like he always dreamt of being, and support him through the ups and downs while traveling the same path he took. He wanted to eat together while talking about their day and plan out what they were going to do on the weekend. All the little moments he wanted to savor with him have been violently ripped from his grasp. He wouldn't acknowledge it, but he knew the moment Izuku left this world. It almost felt as if his soul and life essence went with him. He didn't know how he was going to get through this, especially after realizing one agonizing thought. He never even told his son he loved him. When the next morning came, it matched the atmosphere everyone was feeling inside. Dark, dreary, and damp. Class 1A were either drowning in sorrow and guilt or becoming consumed by rage. Bakugo especially was pissed at everything and everyone. That damn nerd had no right to get murdered like that and leave everyone behind like it was no big deal. They were supposed to be heroes together and always be fighting for the #1 spot. He was an idiot for letting his guard down around the bastard that was his so-called father. What kind of hero would he be if he didn't watch his back? He was always on alert, even in his sleep. The one thing he knew is when that piece of shit was found, he will gladly become his executor. Shoto was feeling the same rage towards Hisashi and his audacity to take his family's lives like that. He considered Izuku his best friend, the one who taught him that his power was his own. Why he had to die was something he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Izuku was someone everyone loved to be around, he had no bad bone in his body. For him to be murdered by his own father, by someone who is supposed to protect him, was a cruelty he never thought possible. He just hoped that Izuku and his mother's souls were resting peacefully after their sudden deaths. Izuku woke up on the forest floor to the sound of his name being called. His mind was slow to fully comprehend his surroundings, let alone what happened to him. He heard his name being called once more and he finally came to realization of who it was. "Mom?" he whispered. Once he started to wake up more, everything came flooding back to him about his father, the camping trip. A knife slicing his neck open. He then shot up, panicked, grabbing his neck, searching for any signs of bleeding, only to discover nothing. Was it just a nightmare? He thought out loud. "Izuku, where are you?" He heard his mom call again. "I'm over here, Mom." He shouted back as his mom ran over to him crying. "Izuku, I'm so glad why you're okay," she said, hugging him tightly. "I'm glad you're okay too, Mom, but do you know what happened?" I'm not sure," Inko said, wiping her eyes. "The only thing I remember was falling asleep after we ate. Izuku was confused to say the least, he didn't know where his father was and why he was in the spot he was. As he was thinking about what he last remembered, he heard two people talking while walking towards them. "Oh good, hi officers, I think we may need some help on finding out where we are," Izuku said towards the two police officers. "Alright, Namasa wants us to clear the area of any gear we may have left out here and reopen the trail again," one of the men said. Hello. Sorry for disrupting you, but me and my mom were just wondering if you knew the way back to the camping grounds." "I don't think we did, but you never know, these rookies have been screwing up a lot lately." The officers seemed to be completely oblivious to their presence, confusing them both further. "Excuse us, can you guys just take a second?" Inko reached towards one of the officers just for her hand to go right through him. She retracted her hand in surprise and looked down at the same hand, then back to Izuku who was in equal shock. "Alright, I think that's it, let's head out and tell the ranger they can open this area again." As the officers walked off, Inko and Izuku watched them leave in a slight panicked confusion. "What just happened?" Inko asked to her son. "I'm not too sure myself," Izuku said, walking up to a tree. As he walked, he noticed something odd he never thought about until now. His footsteps were quiet. No leaves rustling, no branches breaking, and he almost felt as if was gliding instead of walking. He then turned around to try to touch a tree, only for him to go through it just like his mom's with a man's shoulder. Hey mom, I don't think we're alive anymore," he said with fear. Inko stared at him with tears in her eyes, showing the same fear and shock Izuku did. "We have to find out how to get home," Izuku said to his disgruntled mother. Inko began to cry harder when she realized that her son died with her. She didn't know how this happened, but she hoped they found a way back soon. Yagi had no desire to do anything but lay in bed and grieve the life he could have had with his little boy. Tears were coming and going whenever they felt like, and his whole body felt like lead. He knows he should eat something, but he knew it would just come back up no matter how hard he tried. He wanted this life to end already so he could be reunited with his light. As he was spiraling further into his depression, he heard a knock at the door. He did nothing to move, knowing he had no intention of talking to anyone ever again. He heard the knock once more and a familiar voice calling his name. He cringed in annoyance and mustered every bit of energy he could to stand up. When he got to the door, Namasa greeted him with pity and worry painting his face. "You look like you've been hit by a truck," he said, trying to slightly lighten the mood. "What do you want?" Yagi responded, clearly not in any mood for small talk. Namasa sighed and broke the news. "We found him." Yagi looked at him with slight confusion before Namasa continued. "We found Hisashi Midoriya, he was hiding out at a motel a few towns over." It wasn't a smart move on his part when he used his credit card to pay for the room. Yagi looked at him with a neutral face. "Where are you keeping him?" he asked in a dangerous tone. "He's at the station currently being questioned. Won't be much of a use though since I already got to him. He lied horribly at first until he realized he wasn't getting around my quirk." Yagi then went to go change before he emerged. "Take me to go see him," he said as he left towards the car. Namasa knew this was going to be a bad idea, but if this give Tashi a sense of closure, he'll do it to allow him to heal properly. The drive was a silent one with Yagi keeping an unreadable expression staring out his window. When they arrived, Yagi quickly got out of the car and headed towards the bastard that took his baby from him. "Tashi, wait, what are you planning on doing?" Yagi looked at him with rage burning behind his eyes. "I just want to talk to him alone for a minute is all." "You know I can't allow that. You're going to do something stupid with the state you're in, I know it. Besides, getting revenge isn't going to bring Izuku back." Once that sentence left him, Yagi threw him against the wall, holding him there by his collar. "I don't care what you think, that man took everything from me, and I won't let him get away from my grasp that easily," he said with venom lacing every word. Yagi then released the detective, storming towards the interrogation rooms with clear violent intent. Namasa raced towards Yagi, grabbing him by the shoulder. "Wait Tashi." As he turned Toshinori around, Yagi punched him square in the face, knocking him out before he hit the floor. "I'm sorry Namasa, but I have to do this," Yagi said as he dragged the detective to an empty room. He then closed the door he left his friend in and found himself staring at the beast he had been wanting to talk to for a long while. Aizawa was in a drift, so to speak. He had bouts of rage one minute, deep grief another, which would be followed by numbness. He remembered how many students he expelled to protect them from an early death they would have faced in the field. Even now, looking back at Midoriya's beginning, he still believed that he would have made a perfect hero after he graduated. He would never regret teaching him, but at the same time he believed Midoriya would have been better off in another school. If he were to stray from UA, he could have avoided the attention that went with it. He had a large suspicion that Hisashi Midoriya only came back to visit because he didn't want someone discovering his abandonment of his family. With UA gaining the media attention it had of late, Hisashi most likely got nervous that someone would put two and two together and question him about Izuku being his son. Izuku also said that his father never wanted him, so he decided to come back to finish the job he wanted to do long ago. Izawa had to mentally prepare himself for teaching the class that was also in deep grief, which he knew was going to be hard to get through. As he walked through the door, it was far more quiet than he has ever heard from this class in particular. Usually he came into a rowdy bunch with Tenya shouting at them to quiet and sit down. Today he saw students deep in thought and lost in a grief he knew all too well. I know we are all shaken over all of this, but we have no choice but to continue class the best we can. We have Hound Dog available for any students who need it, but you'll need permission to be excused if it's required. The class remained silent until your Rocket decided to speak up. Do you know if All Might will come back to teach? She asked quietly. I'm not sure myself, we haven't heard much of him after all this occurred, but I will tell you all if I hear anything. Everyone silently looked on as the lesson began without many of them paying attention. The lesson was just as hard as Izawa thought it would be. Izuku and his mother found a hiking trail when they followed the same path out of the thick wooded area the officers took. Once they made it to the main camping grounds, they tried getting someone's attention with the same result of no one acknowledging them. Unlike his mother, who was on the verge of a panic attack, he stayed strong and level-headed to figure out a way to get them both back home. He didn't know why he felt such a strong desire to go back to Musatafu, but it looked like his mother had the same urge as he did. As he was thinking about a way back, his mother interrupted his thoughts with a question he sadly knew the answer to. Why are we dead and where did your father go? I wonder if he somehow died from whatever happened to us too. Izuku knew his mother still loved Hisashi and believed he loved her back, but now he would have to tell her what he saw before he bled to death. Mom, I know how we died, but I don't know if you'll believe me, Izuku said with sadness. Inko looked at Izuku in surprise. You know how we died, when did you discover that? Well, I didn't know we were actually dead when we woke up, but before I fell asleep, I saw Dad in my tent and Izuku had to stop from the lump in his throat building, but he forced himself to continue so his mother wouldn't worry. Dad told me he drugged us, most likely by spiking our food, so we won't fight back or use our quirks against him. He told me he wasn't interested in keeping us alive because he practically saw us weights holding him down. I knew I should have told you about how uneasy I was about him being back, but I knew you still wanted us to be a family. If I would have just told you, maybe none of this would have happened, Izuku said in tears of guilt over his mother's death. Inko embraced him once more, matching his tears while shushing him. She reassured him that she didn't blame him for anything that happened to them. If anything, you should be blaming me for this. I should have seen the signs of his plans and protected us both from him. I was so desperate to give you a father again that I completely ignored why he would suddenly change out of nowhere like he did. I've been a terrible mother. Izuku shook his head violently as his tears continued to fall. I'll never blame you, Mom, you were there for me my entire life unlike him, and you always supported me when I needed you most. They continued to comfort each other as a bus pulled up full of tourists making their way back to their camps. The mother and son then both looked at each other with the same idea. Yagi was seeing red as he looked at this man in the face. He wanted to beat the living crap out of him until he stopped breathing, but the sliver of sanity he had left told him that taking his life would not be worth it. Why? He said in rage. Why would you murder your own son and wife? Izuku was an innocent child that wanted nothing more than to do good for this world. You had no right to play God and take his life like that. Toshinori continued to scream at Hisashi as the man kept his head down while being as still as a statue. Yagi was getting more infuriated by the second because this bastard wasn't even man enough to look him in the eye. Are you just going to sit there like a coward, or are you going to face the punishment you deserve? Hisashi then slowly looked up at All Might. I killed them because they were in the way. Let's just say my new girl didn't like the thought of having future drama, and besides, I never wanted having a child, especially a quirkless one like Izuku, he said with venom and hatred. It went quiet for a few seconds before Hisashi watched as Yagi Toshinori turned into the #1 hero All Might in a swirling of steam and smoke. He backed up into the wall behind him in shock and nervousness as he tried to stabilize himself. You're all bark and no bite, everyone knows you don't have the power to hold that for more than a few seconds, Hisashi said in obvious fear. Yagi said nothing as he pulled his fist back and aimed it towards Hisashi, even though he was on the other side of the room. Before Hisashi could run, Yagi thrust his fist forward, sending a massive wave of wind pressure with it that went through the wall and Hisashi like butter. The building practically exploded as Hisashi went flying until he hit a tree a large distance away from where he was standing. As the dust settled, Yagi deflated back into his base form out of breath with blood dripping from his mouth. As Toshinori slowly came back to his senses, Namasa turned him around suddenly with something akin to fear on his face. What the hell just happened? Police surrounded the scene as Nasama took Yagi away towards his car in a rush. Toshinori was still in a daze when Namasa started shaking him by the shoulders. Toshi, snap out of it. What was that? I thought you couldn't use your power anymore. Yagi was hanging his head down as he began to chuckle. I felt him. He whispered as the detective looked at him as if he were crazy. What? I felt Izuku. Izuku and Inko were sitting on the bus exhausted. Even though they were dead, they still felt that same physical wear as if they were alive, which was bizarre to them both. Inko soon fell asleep as Izuku thought about the situation he was in. He knew his father was acting weird the entire time he was around, but he never knew it would lead to him killing both him and his mom. When he started to fall in his mother's footsteps into sleep, he felt a huge pull in his abdomen that activated One for All. He startled to full awareness and hunched forward, clutching his stomach in surprise. The pull he felt wasn't one of pain, but it was a weird sensation he couldn't describe. It was similar to playing a game of tug-of-war, but he was on the losing end of it, getting pulled towards the other team. He also felt a strong surge of rage that wasn't his own. Almost like it was feedback from something or someone else. Just as quickly as the feeling came, it faded away along with One for All. He then felt even more drained than ever before and promptly passed out. When Izuku and Inko finally made it back to Musatafu after jumping bus to bus, they started walking through the city towards their apartment. As they walked past an electronics shop with a TV displayed in the window, they overheard of a recent arrest being covered by the news station. The search for the suspected murderer Hisashi Midoriya has ended after the Musatafu Police Department arrested him as gunpoint at a nearby motel. After a few weeks of recovering in the hospital due to an unknown accident, Hisashi has officially been convicted for the murder of his wife and son Inko and Izuku Midoriya. The judge in his trial sentenced him for 2 life terms in a maximum security prison as punishment for his crimes. Izuku listened with a sense of relief and justice, knowing Hisashi was getting the punishment he deserved. So it's true, he actually did this to us. Inko whispered in a deep sadness. Knowing his mother was feeling more guilt, he tried to reassure her the best he could. It's not your fault, Mom, he never shown signs of murderous intent before. Even I never thought he would go as far as he did, and I was the one who was suspicious of him. He knew his mother was still struggling with her guilt about all this, but he couldn't really blame her since he was feeling the same thing over her death. Inko slightly nodded as they moved on down the street. They both continued walking silently until Izuku came to a halt and looked as if he were to start crying again. Izuku, what's wrong, honey? Inko asked before she looked in the same direction as her sons. She instantly realized why he was so upset as she stared at the impressionable building of UA. I wonder how everyone is doing after everything. I like to think they are missing me, but I also caused them a lot of trouble in a short amount of time. They might be relieved that they don't have to deal with my constant bad luck with villains. Inko wanted to tell him how wrong he was and how his friends loved him, no matter how much trouble they got into, but something stopped her before the words left her. Hey Izuku, is it just me or does that man look awfully familiar? Izuku came out of his self-depriving thoughts and turned around to look at the person she was talking about. He then went from a confused expression to an excited one as he recognized the tired man slowly walking down the street. Mr. Izawa. You're here. Izuku yelled as he ran up to him. As he tried to stand in front of him, Izawa continued walking and went straight through Izuku's body as a result. Shouta then came to a stop and looked around, feeling an odd chill run through him. Izuku flailed his arms in front of Izawa's face while shouting his teacher's name to try to get a reaction. He stopped his attempt when Izawa turned around with a blank expression on his face as he advanced forward once more. Izuku stared at his teacher as he left with tears cascading down his face. He hated this. He hated being invisible to the ones he loved and dying before he could show everyone he was worthy of being a hero. The only thing he wanted was to wake up from this horrible nightmare and go about his day with a new sense of appreciation for being alive. As he grieved for himself, his mom came up behind him and comforted the best she could. I know, I'm just as upset over this situation as you, honey. I never wanted you to experience an early death. Why do you think I always so worried when I heard you got involved in another villain attack? Izuku wiped at his tears as he looked back up at his mom with understanding. I know, and I'm really sorry for making you worry all time. I never asked to get in trouble so much, it just sort of happened, he explained through more tears. Once they were both past their mini breakdowns, they finally came into view of their finish line. They both started to speed up as they came up to the front door, but before they entered, Izuku noticed his mother stop suddenly. Do you see that too? She asked in amazement. Izuku paused to look at the door. See what, Mom? The light coming from the other side. It's incredibly bright, how can you not see it? Izuku looked at her with confusion and then realized something he has heard from the many stories of people saying what happens after you die. It's the other side, he said in a low voice. Well, yes, I know it's the other side of the door, but… No, Mom, I mean it's the entrance to the afterlife. I think the whole reason you were so desperate to get back here was because you somehow knew our home was your way into it. Izuku was unsure if that was true or not, but he had a strong feeling it was. Inko looked at her son in shock, but her next question quickly left her when she realized what would happen next. "Then why can't you see it? You should be coming with me too, right?" she said in a nervous tone. Izuku looked at her in empathy. "No mom, I can't leave yet, I still have so much I need to do. I feel like something is trying to pull me towards it, but I don't know what it is yet. If I find whatever it is, I can probably join you, but for now, I think you should be at peace like you deserve." Inko looked at her son through more tears as she threw herself at him in grief. "I can't just leave you behind, you are my happiness. You deserve to be at peace too," she said in desperation. Izuku just smiled down at her with fondness. "I will find peace mom, but not yet. My peace is still somewhere out there waiting for me to discover it. This won't be forever, but until I'm done here, I can't come with you." Inko continued to cry, but she respected her son's choice because she knew Izuku never stood down when he made up his mind. It was also her job as a mother to support her child through any journey he decided to take. Okay, but when you do find what you're looking for, do you promise to find me again?" "Of course mom, I would never turn my back to you," he said, smiling reassuringly. Inko gave a watery chuckle before she opened the door to a blinding light. She looked on in awe as she saw a beauty she never thought possible, but before she went through, she looked back at Izuku, giving him an "I love you." He returned it with an "I love you too," as she looked forward once more with another bout of surprise. She then gained a face-splitting grin as she ran towards a figure in the distance she recognized immediately. Dad. Yagi was staring up at his ceiling in a trance. He couldn't be going crazy, right? He felt Izuku as if he was right there next to him. He knew people in a deep grief would explain how they felt the presence of their loved one at times or claimed to see them briefly walking down the street or something. But this was a whole different feeling that literally made his strength come back to him. He never thought he would be able to use his quirk again after his last fight with All for One. When he punched Hisashi through that wall, the sensation that followed was exactly the same feeling he had when using his quirk. He wondered if One for All returned to him after Izuku died, since there has never been a time where a predecessor outlived their successor. But this thought crossing his mind came another strong wave of grief. Even if it was true and One for All was his once more, he didn't want it. He'd rather have Izuku keep it forever because his little boy deserved it far more than he did. More tears came from him as he contemplated about what he would do next. He still didn't want to think about his life without Izuku by his side, but he knew it was a reality he was forced to face. While he was allowing his grief to take him again, he failed to notice the boy in the corner of his room staring at him with matching tears on his face. Izawa was being distant and he knew that, but he also couldn't seem to care less. All of the other teachers were worried for him and tried to have him talk about his grievances, but he was in no mood. None of his coworkers, other than Hound, were certified to be emotional therapists, and he was definitely not talking to anyone about his internal conflicts. Not even Mick. He wishes they would put their focus on someone else, like his students who were also struggling to get through these times. He feels like he relates more with his students right now compared to other adults, which made him internally cringe from how immature he sounded. The only other adult that could possibly relate to him at the moment hasn't been here for the last 3 weeks. From his understanding, All Might took Midoriya's death just like he thought he would. With denial, anger, and a violent showing of soul-deep grief. He wasn't there when that detective broke the news to Yagi, but Nezu explained how he's been taking it. He knew All Might saw the problem child as his own son, but he himself also had a strong attachment to the troublemaker, annoyingly enough. He came to realize this as he found himself staring at the empty seat by the window every day as class went on. He missed the quiet mumbling he had to correct the kid on as he wrote down odd hero facts in that notebook of his. He missed the determination he expressed as he trained with Bakugo while he came into his quirk more and more with each session. He even missed the calls from Recovery Girl, ordering him to escort the kid back to his dorm room after looking him over from an intense training session. Well, not so much that part, the kid got hurt far too often for his liking. As he was walking back to his class to grade papers, he got a call from Nezu asking for his assistance in a task he assigned to him. He sighed as he turned around back towards the principal's office wondering what it was this time. Izuku was frustrated beyond belief. He couldn't touch or do anything to show All Might he was here and to tell him he was okay. He watched as his real dad cried on and off for hours at a time without taking care of himself in any way. He wanted to tell him to eat, take a shower, go outside, do anything that wasn't laying in bed and crying the day away. He's starting to really worry when his dad tried to get up at times, only for him to nearly pass out when he did. He needed to find a way to communicate with him, but he had no clue how. As a few more days passed with the same issues, Izuku began to think back to the odd moment when he felt that pull in his stomach that activated One for All. He wondered if that had anything to do with All Might because he swore he felt his presence in that moment. He decided to try to activate his quirk to see if anything happened with his dad or if he could somehow communicate through it like the predecessors did with him. As he started to spark with green electricity, the lights in the room started to flicker enough that it went noticed by All Might. What the Yagi said as he opened his sunken bloodshot eyes to look at his bedside lamp. Izuku felt a jolt of happiness as he discovered his quirk makes a difference. He then tried to move the TV remote off the same table, the flickering light was on with a promising result. He felt the weight of the remote move in his hand long enough to push it to the floor. Yagi's eyes then widened in surprise as his TV controller slid across the table onto the floor by itself. He sat up and looked around with confusion, but with a spark of hope mixing in his eyes along with it. Izuku. Dottie said in the same hopeful, pleading voice his face was mirroring. Finally. Izuku said in relief. Bakugo was silent ever since Hisashi's sentencing. He completely ignored his classmates that were always sending worried glances his way. Shitty Hair was the only one brave enough to try to talk to him, which only made him walk away in the opposite direction. He had no desire to talk, especially to those who always cried with even the mention of Deku's name. The only person he wanted to talk to was that murderous asshole that thought he could get away with killing his childhood friend. He was pissed about not finding the bastard first, so he could blow a giant hole in his chest or drug him and slice his throat if he preferred that method. He swore he was going to find the damn nerd in the afterlife, bring him back, and kill him again for getting bested by that creep. Todoroki was no better in the level of rage he felt towards Hisashi. He didn't understand how someone would be so evil to kill their own family for such a stupid selfish reason. He saw the news report about how Hisashi admitted to having a second life in America, he just didn't know why he couldn't have just left them alone. Izuku and his mother weren't harming anyone, and clearly, they weren't interfering with Hisashi's new life either. That lowlife probably always had the desire to murder them ever since Izuku was born, he was just choosing the right time to do it. The only thing he knew was if he ever met that monster in person, he would have no problem showing him what a real fire quirk could do. Every time Uraraka felt like she was out of tears, more would fall. She knew this was just all part of the grieving process, but that still didn't help her feel better. Her parents wanted her to go into counseling since they knew she was close with Izuku, but she had no desire for all that. She never lost anyone close to her like this before, but she learned that she preferred grieve in her alone time. She just hoped that wherever Izuku was, he was at peace with his death and not roaming the earth forever like she heard from those scary ghost stories. "Izuku, are you really here or am I actually losing my mind this time?" Yagi said with uncertainty. Izuku then quickly looked around the room and spotted his dad's laptop on the desk in the corner of the room. He kept his quirk active as he manipulated the computer to play the famous video he watched more times than he could count. Yagi swung around as he heard his own voice play on the laptop with a video playing of him rescuing people from a fire that happened ages ago. "Do not fear." "Why?" "Because I am here." As soon as his famous catchphrase ended, the video stopped and the screen went black. Yagi then stared at the screen and slowing began to chuckle until it changed into the full-blown boisterous laugh he was all too known for. "I knew it. I knew you were here. I thought it was just the depression talking, but you're actually here," Yagi said in joy. He continued to chuckle a bit more before he could compose himself long enough to ask another question. "Can you show yourself in any way or come and touch my hand at all?" he said as he extended his hand out. Izuku tried to touch his hand only for it to go through again. This made him slightly panic thinking his luck ran out, but he focused hard one more time and finally made contact with his dad's hand. Yagi then inhaled sharply with more tears once again making way to his eyes. He then reached out to the sensation of Izuku touching his hand and felt the outline of what was another smaller hand grasping his own. Yagi chuckled once more as another surge of happy tears made their way down his face. He sat on the floor as he cherished the hand he's been wanting to hold again for weeks. He then felt the hand fade away as the lights went back to normal and everything went quiet again. Toshinori grew scared for a second thinking Izuku just came to say goodbye before he moved on, but these fears were calmed once he felt Izuku's presence all around him. "Okay son, I can feel you. Let's just try to keep it that way please, I don't want you lose you again," he said sorrowfully. Another week passed before Izuku could further his ability to keep his body solid. It was tiring after a while, but the end result was well worth it, seeing his dad's happiness slowly return to him. "If you need rest, you can disappear for a bit, I don't want you to overwork yourself," son, Yagi said in worry. It's okay really, I want to train myself to stay visible longer," Izuku said with a bit of strain. Toshinori looked at him in concern, but understood the need to train himself. He hated when Izuku had to disappear because it reminded him that he was still dead, but he knew Izuku had to recover his strength. "I'll be back, I promise," Izuku said with exhaustion lacing his voice. Yagi reassured him that he would be fine as he watched his son fade once more. He really tried to control his tears from falling, but one or two still managed to escape as he took deep breaths to calm himself down. He was able to do so as he felt Izuku wrap his arms around him from behind, with waves of worry radiating from him. "Rest son, I'll be fine, I promise," Yagi said with a fond smile as he grabbed onto the arms he felt around neck. It was an odd thing. When him and his son were near each other, it was like they were able to feel the other's emotions as if they were their own. He thought it was because of One for All, but he doesn't remember feeling anything like this with Nana. Once night fell, Izuku was finally able to re-solidify for another bout of acting like he was still alive. He knew his dad was still not 100% with this whole thing, but he was definitely a lot better than he was. He was able to convince him to eat, shower, and even stay with him long enough to sleep through the night. "How are you feeling, my boy?" "Oh, I feel fine now, I just needed a bit of downtime to get my energy back. I'm just glad I'm able to stay visible without needing to use my quirk anymore. That was more draining than I originally thought it was." Yagi started to become tired himself and started to get ready for bed without saying a word to Izuku. This confused Izuku because he thought he did something wrong until Toshinori came out of the bathroom cleaned and ready for bed heading straight towards him. He continued to stay quiet when he picked Izuku up in the same way he did that night all those weeks ago. This time around, Izuku was prepared for what happens next and allowed his dad to put him in the bed. While Izuku still couldn't keep a slight blush off his face, he waited until Yagi put himself under the covers before he got brave enough to scoot closer to him. Toshinori didn't hesitate to pull his son in close as he sighed in content with having his boy in his embrace again. While Toshinori cherished his current predicament, a thought came across his mind that he couldn't believe he didn't act out sooner. In his half-awake state, he got Izuku's attention by running his hand through his soft curly hair. "Hey son, you still awake?" Yagi whispered as he continued massaging Izuku's head. "Uh-huh," he said nearing unconsciousness. Toshinori chuckled slightly before he finally got to say what he's been wanting to say for a long time. "I love you so much," he said with kiss to Izuku's forehead. Izuku woke up a bit more after hearing those words spoken to him in pure sincerity. "I love you too, Daddy," responded as he buried his face into Yagi's chest. No more words were said as they both held onto each other tightly while they fell asleep with smiles on their faces. Izawa was getting suspicious. He hadn't heard any more news about All Might after Izuku's death and was beginning to wonder if he was still alive himself. He understood why Yagi disappeared after everything, but the least he could do was send a quick text here and there saying he was still breathing. He then pulled out his phone and sent All Might a message asking if he was living, but he received no response back even after several hours. He hated how he actually was beginning to worry since he knew that Toshinori could take care of himself, but something was telling him he should at least check on the oaf. After his classes ended for the day, he looked up Yagi's address and made his way towards the destination. He was preparing himself for the worst just in case he was right about Yagi's condition. As he came up to the door, he observed if there was any signs of death that came from the apartment. He knew it was morbid, but with recent events and working as an underground hero, made him come across horrid scenes before. He saw no flies covering the windows or the smell of death anywhere, so he put his ear up to the door for a moment to listen for movement. As he found none, he knocked on the door relatively loudly just in case he was sleeping. Still hearing nothing after a few more attempts, he became impatient and took out a tool from his pocket that he knew he would probably need for this trip. Once he picked the lock open, he looked around finding a surprising neat front room. There was a few things out of place, but nothing too extreme like he thought there would be for a person going through a bad depression. He continued down the short hallway that led to Yagi's room and opened it quietly, just in case the retired hero was sleeping. His suspicions were proven correct as he saw All Might sleeping soundly in his bed, not budging from his position. Izawa sighed as a bit of relief now knowing Yagi wasn't dead, but he did notice something weird underneath his blanket. As he silently moved towards the side of the bed, he saw Toshinori hugging something under the comforter that was quite large. It wasn't a pillow judging by the shape, but as he carefully lifted the blanket to see what it was, he froze in shock from what he saw. There he was. Izuku Midoriya himself dead asleep without a care in the world, gripping onto All Might like an octopus. Izawa thought he was losing his mind as he stared paralyzed. Izuku was dead, right? He saw the body, his murderer was behind bars because of his death, what the hell was going on? Izuku started to shift a bit and flipped over on his other side with his back facing Toshinori. He then furrowed his brow from the lack of blanket and cracked his eyes open, sleepily looked up at Izawa. Izuku then startled awake with a yelp, jumping back a bit towards Yagi, which resulted in him waking up too. Toshinori then grabbed Izuku and pulled him back while he aggressively lunged towards the stanger that was invading his home and threatening his child. Izawa backed up quickly using his capture weapon to tie Yagi's arms down to try to get him to calm down. Izawa stepped back towards the wall to get to the light switch by the door. He flipped it on, blinding both Yagi and Izuku temporarily while he showed them he wasn't a threat. Both Izuku and All Might took a second to recognize that the man in front of them was Aizawa and not some villain. "What is going on?" Aizawa said angrily. "Everyone thinks Midoriya has been dead for weeks and it only takes me worrying over your ass for me to find you two sleeping the day away like nothing is wrong," he said to All Might in a rage. Kashinori got up off the floor as he put his hands up to calm Aizawa down. "I'm sorry, Eraser, I didn't think it was a smart idea to tell anybody about this yet. We don't even know how this is possible, but we didn't want to get everyone's hopes up by making them think he's alive again." Aizawa glared at him with more anger. "You thought it was intelligent to keep a huge secret like this from me or anyone else that could possibly figure out how he's here." While watching his dad get his head chewed off by Aizawa, Izuku decided it would be a smart idea to step in and explain a bit more of what's happening. "We're sorry, Sensei, I've just been getting the hang of staying in a solid form for longer periods of time now, so we weren't really thinking about the outside world like we should have," Izuku said, ashamed and guiltily. Aizawa looked at Izuku, pausing as he looked at the kid up and down. "So you're still dead?" he asked lowly. "Yeah, but I still don't know why I couldn't move on to the next life like my mom did. Although I'm not too worried about it since I've gained the ability to at least look like I'm alive." Aizawa stepped in front of Izuku, who was standing next to the bed now. He looked at him for a second before pulling the boy in for a hug. "I'm sorry, kid, I should have saved you when I noticed the giant over there freaking out over your whereabouts. I should have known you were in trouble as soon as you left. You always get in some sort of danger when you leave UA's protection," he said with guilt. Izuku was startled by his teacher's sudden display of affection and guilt-ridden confessions, but he hugged him back after he registered what he said. "I don't blame anyone other than Hisashi for my death, Sensei, especially not you. You had no clue about my past with my father, and I wouldn't have expected you to find us that deep in the woods, even if I did tell you I was in danger." Aizawa bent down to Izuku's level. "I know you're not one for putting blame on others, but no matter what you tell me, I will always feel like I played a part in your death. You were an amazing student and I will never regret teaching you for the short while that I did." Izuku hugged Aizawa again with tears prickling his eyes. "Thank you for believing in me, even if you doubted me in the beginning. You were one of the few who actually did," he said gratefully. They held onto the hug a bit longer before releasing and turning to All Might. "You two still have a lot of explaining to do," Aizawa said ominously. That's it for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, then please make sure to leave a like, share and do check it out, author of this fanfic. Take care. Thanks for watching.